Sunlight spills over a grand stone estate, as word quietly spreads that someone has been struggling with seasickness. Two women sit at a lavish dining table, and the blonde woman remarks that she has never traveled such a long distance before. She admits she hasn't really left the south before, sounding a little embarrassed as she glances away. The silver-haired woman calmly sips her tea and reassures that she has never been outside Arendelle either. Still, the blonde woman gazes softly ahead, a faint blush warming her cheeks as she quietly absorbs the gentle moment. A serene and confident woman with long white hair lifts a teacup, while someone nearby quietly marvels that such beauty deserves to live. A considerate host, unseen but attentive, asks if the guest enjoyed the meal and mentions they requested the chef to prepare lighter dishes for comfort. The blonde woman admitted she liked the food, explaining she must have seemed anxious and thanked her host for being concerned. Suddenly, the blonde woman burst out laughing as the silver-haired woman started vomiting rainbows behind her. Sunlight streamed through the elegant room as someone explained that Arak, a spider-like monster, always rampages in summer and her brother might return late. The blonde woman reassured her host that her father would be gone until the end of the month and apologized for offering hospitality so soon. A hand gently cradled a golden-rimmed teacup, as someone quietly explained they'd taken over managing the residence after their mother's passing. A composed woman with long white hair calmly stated she would now change it to match the Mrs.'s preference. A polite and composed servant quietly explained that if the guest felt uncomfortable, she could request anything through the maid's quarters. A blonde woman forced a nervous smile and quietly admitted she found the title Mrs. awkward. Still, the blonde woman hesitantly explained she wished to remain as she was, worried about causing trouble since she was unaccustomed to the customs here. A silver-haired woman stood face-to-face with the blonde woman, tension building in the silent space between them. A confident woman with long white hair calmly assured her unseen companion that there was no need for concern, since nobody would question the missus. The blonde woman blurted out that everything felt much too formal for her, and she couldn't handle this. The blonde woman hesitated, saying she wanted to ask something, and the silver-haired woman gently told her she could ask anything. The blonde woman asked if she could be called Ruby for now. A composed woman with long white hair stood calmly while a nervous and anxious servant watched her with growing worry. A nervous newcomer with a white bonnet told the dark-haired woman she felt scared and uncertain about getting used to being surrounded by strangers. A solemn woman with long white hair gently agreed to act more friendly as she nodded and held her teacup. The blonde woman sat across from the silver-haired woman, her eyes widening in silent surprise as the other turned away without a word. The blonde woman gasped and asked if it was true, while the silver-haired woman calmly confirmed it. A somber woman with long silver hair examines the hand she holds, her expression quietly thoughtful. The blonde woman beamed and thanked someone cheerfully, her gratitude lighting up the room. Suddenly, an unseen character seized the fingers of the owner of the pale hand, startling them. A nervous blonde woman rushed past the calm silver-haired woman, apologizing quickly as the other reassured her it was fine. A blonde girl with blue eyes smiled warmly and asked if she could start calling someone Ellen. A calm young woman with long white hair lifted her teacup and said it was important for everyone to feel comfortable together. A white-haired woman spoke quietly, her ornate necklace gleaming as she formed careful words that hinted at secrets left unspoken. A stern and authoritative advisor stood and warned the two noblewomen that keeping too much distance could easily lead to misunderstandings. The blonde woman realized her sudden entrance might have startled the others and wondered if showing her true self would really cause confusion. Yellow petals drifted on the breeze as the blonde woman admitted to herself that being seen as harmless mattered more than being liked. She smiled among the glowing flowers and insisted she would gladly play the so-called ignorant fool, despite what others might say. She sat alone at the table, telling herself to stay calm and reminding herself that being misunderstood was nothing new. The blonde woman promised the reserved silver-haired woman that she'd do her best not to trouble anyone. A woman with long white hair and red eyes sits in silence, lost in thought as her fingers trace the edge of an intricate necklace. A majestic building glows under twilight as an unseen resident offers to guide someone to the room they'll be using from now on. Sunlight pours into a lavish room as an unseen character calls out with excitement. A cheerful blonde woman in an elegant dress asked the attendants if this beautiful room was really hers. A nervous woman in a dark green dress said she hoped her decoration suited the cheerful woman in pink, who quickly assured her that she loved it. The cheerful blonde woman smiled and said she had always dreamed of having a room with a view of the sea. Still, the blonde woman reassured Ellen that she should rest soon, adding she was not worried and was already planning to head to bed. The blonde woman felt a rush of relief and told herself that her goal was not to win her husband's love. A stern maid stood behind a calm, elegant woman with long white hair as sunlight streamed softly through the window. A serious man with glasses gazed downward, deep in thought as an intense silence settled around him. A woman in bed sneezed suddenly, breaking the quiet of her dimly lit room. Then, a young woman with long blonde hair hugged herself tightly and muttered that the room felt unbearably cold. A blonde woman looked down, quietly reflecting that no matter what happened in the north, she had to find a way to endure. A grand fireplace flickered softly, its glow casting long shadows across ornate candlesticks and polished decorations in the still, quiet room. The woman with long hair sat up in surprise, quietly wondering if the flame had really gone out. Every night in the northern lands, flames were lit in countless castles, their glow breaking up the darkness. Narration explained that a fire would never go out on its own, unless someone deliberately put it out. A young woman in a long dress asked if there was any other way to brighten the dim room. The blonde woman looked down, quietly wondering who could be responsible for such childish behavior. A serious man with glasses sat alone in the shadows, deep in thought. Still, a distressed maid hunched over as someone questioned if she was behind what had happened. Still, the blonde woman appeared startled before her expression crumpled, tears welling in her eyes as sadness overtook her. A calm, long-haired woman sat with her wand ready, facing a horned demon who glared menacingly from behind thick prison bars. A young woman with blonde hair stared ahead, her wide blue eyes frozen with shock as shadows stretched across her face. Still, the young woman with blonde hair turned sharply as a demonic creature with glowing green eyes appeared in the blood-red window behind her. A frightened woman sat frozen on the floor, begging the menacing demon not to come any closer as it advanced through swirling smoke. Moments later, a glowing-eyed dragon skull emerged from the darkness, its menacing gaze cutting through the eerie gloom. A trapped and immobilized figure clenched their fist, thinking desperately that escape was impossible because their body refused to respond. A horned skull creature peered around the corner and warned an unseen presence not to approach. A concerned maid leaned in and urgently asked if Madame had finally woken up. A terrified maid screamed as a demonic bat swooped toward a blonde woman, certain something monstrous was about to happen. A white-haired woman burst through the door, urgently shouting for Ruby. A blonde-haired character's eye narrowed, tense emotion flickering as realization struck in the silence. A glowing sword crashed down as the unknown figure unleashed a fierce, decisive strike through the swirling darkness. A lightning bolt crashed down, striking the menacing and powerful creature with horns in a blinding flash. A young woman with blonde hair clung desperately to another as they tumbled through darkness, debris swirling wildly around them. A young woman with blonde hair shields herself with trembling arms as the swirling darkness closes in, tears gathering in her eyes. A shocked woman with long hair stared up, her voice trembling as she called out when something dark and immense towered above her. A serious white-haired man in a dark uniform stands silently, his red eyes fixed ahead in the heavy quiet. A pale man with light purple hair stands motionless, his calm gaze fixed on the darkness as he senses tension rising in the air. An anxious woman with long wavy hair glances sideways, her hand trembling near her ring as she braces herself for what might come next. A serious and questioning pale-haired character demands to know the reason. A blonde girl with blue eyes asks why someone turned off the torch. A menacing and defiant presence snapped back that they never turned anything off, refusing to accept blame. A pale young man with white hair and red eyes warned that drawing attention wasn't necessary, insisting the other person was already being noticed. An intense white-haired man fixed his glowing red gaze on someone, and demanded to know if this was one of the reasons behind their actions. A distraught blonde girl blurted out that she thought everyone would hate her, and wondered if she would really be okay. A worried young woman with long hair urged her elder brother not to rush, reminding him they still didn't know who was responsible. A serious white-haired woman explained there was no reason for a torch to be lit in Romagna, so the blonde girl couldn't have known. Suddenly, a young woman with blonde hair cried out that she loved Ellen and would save her, no matter what it took. A single pale hand swept gently through the air, the calm after a dramatic outpouring of emotion. A young woman with dark hair nervously clutched someone's sleeve and quietly admitted she was cold before being asked to speak up. A young woman with blonde hair hesitantly explained that when she woke up, the lights in the room were already off. Still, the narrator quietly wondered who else might have done it, thinking it could have been her sister or even herself. A nervous and apologetic figure gripped the lace fabric and quietly apologized, saying they didn't mean what they had just said to their brother. A white-haired woman explained to the serious man that she turned it off because it was getting hot and apologized for causing a fuss. A tearful blonde woman clutched the lace-covered object and vowed aloud that this would be the last time. A serious and contemplative white-haired man watched as a caring white-haired woman comforted the distressed blonde girl, whispering her name softly. A tearful blonde girl asked quietly if she could make a request as a gentle hand softly wiped the tears from her cheek. A silent and possibly contemplative character stayed quiet, tension hanging in the air as their face remained partially hidden. A man in a dark uniform walked away, while an anxious woman, comforted by a supportive figure, insisted softly that it was nothing. A blonde woman with tears in her eyes stared ahead, her sorrow quietly filling the space around her. A woman with long white hair gently comforts the blonde girl, who wonders in frustration what the man walking away had wanted to ask. Two white birds perched quietly on a tree branch outside the window, their calm presence softening the quiet tension inside. A blonde woman cuts her food in silence while a white-haired woman observes her, and a maid waits quietly by the ornate dining table. A young woman with long hair sits at the table, quietly admitting that she feels too nauseous to eat after what happened earlier. A dark-haired character stares with desperate intensity as a chibi blonde figure pleads for someone to say this is just a dream. A woman with long hair sits in calm silence, gently exhaling smoke from her pipe as the room settles around her. A pale-skinned character with white hair and red eyes turns solemnly to the side, lost in thought. A calm and reassuring presence tells a young woman with blonde hair that what happened earlier will not happen again, while the blonde woman reacts in shock. A young woman with blonde hair nervously tries to reassure someone, insisting they already knew another person was responsible, and asking them not to worry. An informative voice mentioned that a court banquet would take place in 4 days, and offered help if anything was needed before then. A young woman with blonde hair quietly considers how the imperial family sponsored her marriage, and how the banquet also honors the king and queen's anniversary. A young woman with blonde hair asked Ellen if she could introduce her to a seamstress, and Ellen repeated the word in confusion. She explained that all the clothes she brought were stylish in the South, but someone told her the summer here is very short. A pale woman with long white hair quietly affirmed to herself that she remembered correctly. She admitted she had already arranged for her dress but felt embarrassed, and decided she would hire a private seamstress instead. A playful and confident blonde woman laughed, saying it was certainly possible and thanked the maids, who whispered secretly beside her. A hopeful blonde woman clasped her hands and thought she needed to make a good impression on everyone attending the upcoming event. A distressed woman sat in her chair, worrying aloud that she had already made a terrible first impression on her intimidating husband. A tall ornate tower reached toward the bright sky, while a quiet voice admitted there was still a long way to go. Sunlight spills across an elegant courtyard, casting a warm, peaceful glow over banners and marble columns. A nervous and hopeful figure held out a basket of fresh fruit, quietly asking if they would be scolded for coming here. Still, a young woman with blonde hair clutched her basket of fruit, surrounded by sparkling light and roses as she gathered her courage. A serious-looking man with dark hair stood alone in the shadows, thinking he needed to understand his husband's personality after Alenia's advice. An anxious girl with bunny ears hid behind a tree, thinking her greatest wish was simply to avoid dying at her husband's hands. A blonde woman in a red dress clenched her fist and told herself she needed to appear as harmless as possible. A white-haired man, partially submerged in glowing liquid, resolved aloud to rely on his backup plan if he failed to save Alenia. Ornate rings hovered among golden flowers as someone explained that Alenia was poisoned for being engaged to the prince of the Doria's kingdom. The Pope locked eyes with the prince while a blonde woman and 2 uneasy men stood between them, suspicion thickening the air. A pale hand reached upward through blood, and someone insisted it was reckless to poison another, even for a family as notorious as theirs. The Princess of Borgia wondered aloud who would trust her if she claimed she could foresee Alenia's poisoning. A dense forest framed the looming stone walls of Elendale, while the Princess of Borgia whispered that her father's spies would be everywhere in the city. A blonde woman watched the sword fighters training, quietly wondering if getting caught would mean being sent home right away or facing unknown consequences. A blonde man in armor asked the blonde woman who she was searching for as she peeked nervously from behind the door. The blonde-haired young man hesitated, admitting he wasn't sure how to continue. A cheerful blonde man greeted Lady Rebecca, asking if she was the woman everyone had mentioned. A knight with blonde hair apologized, explaining he had accompanied the long-haired character at Elmosport yesterday, and the long-haired character quickly responded with an apology for being disrespectful. The confident and approachable blonde man smiled, asking the taken aback and tentative blonde woman if she recognized him and why she had come. The blonde woman hesitated, admitting she wasn't sure how to answer. The blonde woman said she had heard her husband was there, hoping the amused blonde man could confirm it. The blonde man stared in disbelief and blurted out that the blonde woman really came just to see Isaac. The blonde man quickly clarified to the blonde woman that she was there to see Isaac, not anyone else. The cheerful blonde man winked and told the blonde woman to wait there for a moment. A woman with antler-like hair shouted that Isaac's wife had arrived, calling his name again as he stood silent with a clenched fist. A pale blonde woman peeked nervously from behind the door as nearby voices argued about Lady Rebecca, and warned someone to control themselves. A woman in a long dress froze near the column as an unseen man demanded to know why she was there. A blonde woman with blue eyes turned her head sharply, startled by a sudden sound. A pale-skinned young man with white hair and red eyes stood alone as light drifted around him, his expression unreadable. A nervous and uneasy young woman holding a basket muttered that these men always seemed to appear from behind. A white-haired young man looked sideways, saying he had worried this morning because it seemed the other person was upset with him. The silver-haired man told the anxious blonde girl that now she had seen he was fine, she should leave and go back. Suddenly, the person trying to stop the other urgently yelled for them to wait and grabbed the sleeve of the person walking away. An off-balance or startled individual stumbled, shouting in surprise as their basket of fruits tumbled to the ground. Still, the woman in red dress knelt to gather her spilled fruit and let out a soft, embarrassed sound. A distressed girl clenched her teeth in panic, muttering that Ellen had said her score was precious and now it was ruined. A blonde girl rushed to scoop up the fallen fruit, thinking she could finish if she managed it within 3 seconds. A questioning presence demanded to know what was happening as a pale hand reached for the orange resting on the table. A frustrated and trembling young woman snapped that he should be the one apologizing, then stammered an apology while offering the food she brought. A white-haired man stood with his arms crossed, demanding to know why someone was picking up what was already on the floor and telling them to do it themselves. A determined hand gripped the orange ball as its owner muttered that they would go along with it, unwilling to back down. A young woman with long light brown hair wiped away fake tears, insisting she just wanted to clear up the misunderstanding, and joked about her unexpected acting skills. Then an unseen voice pressed for answers, asking what misunderstanding there could be if divorce was already on the table. A blonde woman knelt on the floor, wiping away tears as she admitted she understood why she was hated, but struggled with regret. A confident and subtly menacing purple-haired character smiled as they demanded to know who had shared that information. A white-haired man with red eyes leaned forward, asking who had claimed he hated the unseen listener. The blonde woman hesitated, admitting she thought she was disliked, but someone off-panel quickly reassured her that wasn't how they felt. The hopeful girl lit up, asking in disbelief if he really meant it, while the narrator declared her crying had failed and it was time for a new tactic. The blonde girl nearly shouted as she asked again if he truly meant it, her excitement and hope clear in her voice. Amazed, the blonde girl stared wide-eyed as she repeated in disbelief what she had just heard. A tall white-haired man stood silently as the blonde girl looked up at him, her desperate pleading met with unbroken calm. A blue-haired character laughed nervously to herself, muttering that she had gotten too excited. A frustrated young man with white hair ran his hand through his hair, muttering to himself that he couldn't believe what he was doing. A blonde girl with blue eyes stammered an apology, then realized aloud that this must be the situation she had been anticipating. Sunlight poured through towering pillars and golden banners as the narrator reflected that she had been prepared for the worst, but felt unexpectedly grateful for the outcome. A serious white-haired man accepted a fruit from the woman, keeping his gaze lowered as he steadied the basket in his hands. An assertive, unseen figure snatched the fruit basket from a shocked blonde woman, insisting she stop offering help since her favors were no longer needed. A cold, white-haired man warned that he wouldn't care what happened, telling the unseen listener not to misunderstand his intentions. A grand building loomed against the cloudless sky as an unseen voice warned others not to joke or attempt conversation with someone unintelligent. A provocative and toxic presence taunted the unseen listener, suggesting they should write a formal request to return home. A blonde woman with blue eyes paused, gripping a braided rope as she looked upwards, her expression caught between surprise and concern. Still, a white-haired man turned his head slightly, sunlight catching his face as he paused in quiet reflection. Still, the woman in red dress realized that acting pitiful would no longer sway the white-haired man as he walked away through the doorway. Still, a white-haired man closed his eyes in pain as a hand rested gently on his head. She reflected that, based on what she saw earlier, he seemed either childish enough to argue or perhaps had some deeper psychological issue. A serious-looking white-haired young man with red eyes considered whether any of his suspicious actions would ever make the other man doubt him. A blonde woman with long wavy hair smiled with pure joy, her hands clasped near her chest as glowing flowers surrounded her. Then, everything paused as anticipation hung in the air. A blonde girl yelled that she didn't want to go through with it, stopping the white-haired man in his tracks as he walked away with his sword. The blonde-haired girl blurted out that she couldn't hold back her feelings any longer and had to speak right now. She declared that she was in love, her voice echoing through the room. A blonde woman clenched her fist and shouted with determination, her voice ringing out as tears streaked down her face. A white-haired man stood alone in a grand room as a woman behind him declared that she loved him. Then, a blonde-haired character in the foreground stared in horror as three others froze in shock around him. A blonde woman with a self-assured smile clenched her fist and said she was proud of her impressive acting skills. A pale young man with light hair let out a weary sigh. A white-haired young man spun around, demanding to know what had just happened. A blonde woman nervously admitted she couldn't hide her feelings anymore, and asked the listener to be gentle with their response. The woman with long hair quietly recalled that she had been rescued first from danger just yesterday. A blonde woman with blue eyes pleaded softly, asking if the listener could help her just a little since she believed she wasn't hated. The blonde girl admitted she was actually a fangirl, and said if he saw her as unimportant, she could finally feel hope. A blonde woman in a red dress stood calmly on a balcony as an excited crowd below cheered and raised their fists toward her. Still, the blonde-haired woman glanced sideways, suspicion flickering in her uneasy eyes. A blonde woman shouted in shock, demanding to know when the silver-haired man had reached the door. A determined young woman shouted at the crowd, insisting that she would not be a nuisance and was telling the truth. The blonde woman muttered that she would let things go for now, but warned he should be careful. A caretaker or attendant gently rested their hand on the blonde-haired woman, quietly informing her that everything was finished. A blonde woman with sparkling blue eyes gazed ahead, hope lighting her face as an unseen hand finally reached out to her. She thought about how she hadn't seen Isaac since that confession, and remembered Ellen saying she was busy with summer preparations. A blonde woman with elegant jewelry exhaled softly, her breath carrying a hint of weariness. Moments later, the blonde woman with elegant jewelry glided down the grand staircase, graceful and serene as sparkling light danced around her. A poised woman with long white hair told Ruby she appeared ready for the banquet. The blonde woman shields her eyes from the blinding light, as she vows not to let fate pair her with someone unworthy. The blonde woman asked the unseen listener to greet the person beside them, explaining that this guest was one of her oldest friends. Freya Van Furiana greeted Lady Rebecca and said she was glad to finally meet her. A blonde woman appears flustered as someone loudly calls her the scandalous friend Freya. Two maids, one with brown hair and one with blonde hair and glasses, clapped their hands together in a burst of cheerful energy. One maid complained that the blonde woman always received kinder treatment, feeling those admiring looks hid a flash of disdain. A radiant blonde woman greeted Lady Furiana and said it was nice to meet her. The blonde woman with purple eyes gasped, unable to hide her shock. The cheerful blonde woman exclaimed that no one had mentioned how lovely the reserved white-haired woman was, insisting it would have sounded odd if she had said so herself. The blonde woman with a fan turned away, leaving the brown-haired woman and the white-haired woman watching her in tense silence. A woman with purple eyes studied the decorated object, her gaze lingering in quiet contemplation. The blonde woman asked if there was something wrong with her dress. The woman in the purple dress told Ruby that elder brother Isaac might be late and asked her to be patient, since it happened often. The blonde woman smiled and reassured Ellen that she was fine, adding she didn't expect anything from Isaac and there was no need to worry. A Gothic castle loomed beneath the full moon as someone wondered aloud when their luck would change, and how they could improve their image. A horse-drawn carriage crossed a high stone bridge, heading toward the grand palace of Agniban under the full moon. A woman holding a fan faced a distinguished man in a white cravat as elegantly dressed onlookers watched in a stately formal room. A pale woman with long white hair quietly turned away as a blonde man spoke to her, laughter from the guests echoing behind them. A somber woman stood apart from the lively banquet, quietly reflecting that people only approached her to connect with her father or brother. People gathered around Julia and father, quietly acknowledging that gaining their favor required completing certain tasks for a share of their power. She explained that she naturally became someone others both revered and envied. The young blonde woman wondered if others would judge her harshly if her sorrowful truth ever came to light again. She admitted that what frightened her most was the feeling of being utterly powerless in defeat. The small blonde girl stood apart, feeling overwhelmed and quietly admitting she felt childish and short among the poised women gathered in the grand room. A voice greeted the composed noblewoman, addressing her as Lady Rebecca as she turned her head in the lavish room. A man with glasses asked how the Holy Pope was doing. A hush fell as the crowd parted. Someone whispered that the woman in the center must be Omerta's knight. A woman with long blonde hair nervously asked about the Holy Pope and Cardinal Valentino, but someone nearby snapped that they didn't know anything either. A woman with long white hair quietly remarked to the blonde-haired woman that she found the people around them to be unusual. Side by side, a surprised and speechless woman wondered aloud if those shocking words had really just come from Ellen. A confident blonde woman called out to Isaac with a bright greeting, catching the attention of two nearby women who watched her with mixed feelings. 5 knights in dark armor gathered in the grand hall, and the energetic young man spoke excitedly to the calm, white-haired leader. A white-haired young man in a blue cloak calmly turned his head, his serious gaze steady and thoughtful. A nervous blonde woman with long hair waved awkwardly, asking if he lied about coming late just to avoid seeing her. The smiling woman watched the central white-haired figure approach his armored group, thinking to herself that she always knew he would act this way. The blonde woman asked if they should scold him, and the white-haired woman declared she would pull his ear to teach him a lesson. Someone clenched their fist, bracing themselves for what was coming next. Moments later, a woman with long blonde hair strode away as someone behind her called out Ruby's name in surprise. Still, the blonde woman hurried through the grand hall, troubled by rumors and by Isaac's coldness as dozens of onlookers watched her pass. Still, the blonde woman stood completely still, her serious expression revealing nothing. A group of knights gathered together as a white-haired knight considered how every attempt here would only leave him humiliated. A resolute woman declared she would never let go, vowing fierce loyalty to the calm armored man standing before her. For figures in elegant clothes froze in a lavish room, each face tense with worry as something unseen held their attention. Still, a blonde woman let out a soft sigh before breaking into a joyful smile, and saying she was glad to see the other person looking well. Then, a white-haired man and a blonde woman stood side by side as the curious crowd whispered about them. The blonde woman smiled gently and asked if they really thought she would pretend not to notice. A fierce inner spirit insisted that, despite burning with energy, embracing the idea of being a fangirl was out of the question. The pale-haired young man glared ahead, his crimson eyes burning with determination. A serious silver-haired man remarked that the blonde woman didn't seem very concerned about maintaining appearances. A blonde woman clasped her hands and apologized, quietly adding that she hoped she hadn't been a bother by interrupting. The blonde woman covered her mouth overjoyed, As she exclaimed that she was thrilled, he remembered what she had said. A white-haired man with red eyes turned, startled, as he demanded to know what was happening. A grateful woman declared she would never trouble the armored men again. An excited man in a lab examined the rock, declaring with delight that it was genuine. The white-haired man with red eyes quietly decided he would only watch from a distance from now on. A cheerful girl with long blonde hair waved goodbye, urging everyone to run away quickly and saying it was time to go. The white-haired man grabbed the blonde woman and demanded she repeat herself, insisting she clarify what she meant. The white-haired man grabbed the frightened pink-haired girl and demanded to know if she really wanted to risk her life by following him. A gloved figure seized the blonde woman's shoulder, and she stammered that she couldn't tell if she had triggered a trap. The gloved hand clamped down on the blonde woman's chest as she asked why he felt the need to do that. The blonde woman cried out that she only wanted to see him but was afraid to bother him. Then she shouted that it hurt. The blonde woman wondered if the white-haired man believed she wanted to assassinate him, insisting to herself that such a thing would be utter madness. A single deep exhale left a young person with closed eyes, steadying themselves in the quiet tension. A blonde man in blue armor spoke sternly, telling Lady Rebecca her actions had been extremely reckless. Suddenly, a blonde-haired girl gasped in shock as a gloved figure seized her by the neck. A blonde woman with blue eyes grew uneasy as she tried to reassure someone that her husband would never mistake her for an assassin. A white-haired knight gathered divine energy into his sword, then lunged forward to strike at a shadowy figure defending with a bloodied blade. A pale, worried woman clutched her dress tightly, afraid that in the chaos, no one would be able to tell a human from a monster. A blue-eyed figure's eye widened, stunned by something unseen. A golden chandelier glimmered overhead as the narrator explained that knights reach a state called excessive excitement when their swords and powers are at their peak. A blonde woman with long hair quietly admitted she had nearly caused trouble and apologized, explaining she was from a southern village. An anxious blonde man tried to hold back a white-haired man, insisting he must not know about something and urging him to say something. An assertive but cautious figure insisted they would never cause trouble and demanded to be released, standing firm on the patterned carpet. The white-haired woman informed the partially visible figure that she would notify them in advance if the schedule changed. A blonde woman winked and tapped the man's shoulder, teasing that he should feel lucky to have such beauties waiting for him at home. The confident woman with dark hair waved a chicken drumstick at the stoic man with white hair as the others watched in tense silence. A young man with white hair glared down, while someone out of view complained that his attitude was narrow-minded and begged him to stop. The unseen observer noted that the blonde man's reaction was different this time, expecting him to simply walk away and ignore them as before. A young man with white hair spoke with quiet intensity, his voice cutting through the tension as he addressed someone just out of view. Trumpeters lifted their instruments and signaled the emperor's entrance, while a herald loudly ordered everyone to rise in honor of His Majesty. A commanding and dignified emperor stood with a graceful, composed noblewoman as sunlight filtered through the ornate chamber. A blonde woman and a tall white-haired man bowed low before the richly dressed pair as armored guards followed their lead in the grand hall. The commanding, authoritative man addressed the blonde woman as Lady Rebecca. The blonde woman with closed eyes thanked the unseen visitor for their effort, and said she appreciated the light they brought to this place. The older man in ornate uniform thanked the king for his warm welcome. A cheerful man with a brown mustache joked that his nephew rarely attended banquets and teased that marriage had made him more mature, then laughed. Three men locked eyes in silent tension as the white-haired man declared he was the bearded older man's son, sparking sharp words from both sides. A blonde woman watched anxiously as a white-haired man turned away, thinking he was acting distant again and noting to herself that his moods always shifted. A blonde woman forced a tight smile as she said the others could laugh because she was the fool her husband had left behind. The blonde-haired man yelled that if that bastard weren't the son of Isis, things would be different. A blonde woman tried to soothe the queen, while a brown-haired woman moved the curtain aside and warned that something might be surprising. A timid young girl with curly hair hesitated, clutching a taller figure's cloak while a blonde woman lingered quietly nearby. A man with a cape told the blushing blonde girl she should greet others politely instead of staring. Princess Arian, noble and polite yet visibly hesitant, greeted Lady Rebecca and quietly welcomed her to Ongban, the imperial palace. The smiling blonde woman thanked Princess Arian and called her adorable, marveling that so little kindness remained in the world. A shy and playful small girl hid behind a composed and elegant woman as the joyful girl called out, urging everyone to hide. A blushing young woman peeked out carefully, thinking she finally understood why the princess was rarely seen in the original story. Two voices reflected on how the queen came from the east, noting Emperor Rionol's devotion, but questioned the little girl's supposed pagan heritage. A young girl in a yellow dress stood alone in the spotlight, while voices remarked that Arian must be a stranger among the aristocrats of Britannia. A solemn blonde woman stared into the darkness, certain she could not find sympathy for anyone in this world or the next. A young girl in a yellow dress stood silently across from an older woman as glowing flowers shimmered softly around them. Golden light spilled over fine china as three elegantly dressed women gathered for a quiet meal. Still, a worried woman in a purple dress asked the woman with long white hair where she had been. Then a blonde woman with blue eyes paused mid-sip, her gaze fixed on something just out of view. A disappointed woman in a purple dress told the others she had tried to bring Iski back, but her request was completely ignored. A skeptical white-haired woman told the resigned blonde their effort had failed, adding he never listened to them anyway, and the blonde quietly agreed. A playful blonde woman asked the white-haired woman, Lady Rebecca, if she enjoyed horseback riding, admitting she liked it herself but wasn't very skilled. A smiling blonde woman in an elegant dress lifted her glass and cheerfully admitted she had lied. Several riders in formal attire guided their horses through shafts of light, as the speaker recalled learning elite sports but never enjoying any of them. A pale hand adorned with a ring flicked a decorative fan and someone remarked that Lady Alenia and Lady Freya surpassed everyone here in horseback riding. The confident blonde woman suggested Lady Rebecca should try asking her husband for help, noting that everyone owed their success to Sir Iski. The blonde woman mentioned that Iski used to be more willing to help when he was younger, addressing the brown-haired woman as Lady Consolation. Lady Freya declared she was naturally gifted, while the blonde woman politely called it a compliment and the amused woman tried not to laugh. The blonde woman smiled slyly behind her ornate fan, while the narrator guessed she found the situation between Freya and them fascinating. A young woman with blonde hair laughed to herself, thinking she just needed to look like the world's most harmless airhead. The young woman with blonde hair thanked them for their concern, but said she didn't want to take up her husband's time over something small. A young woman with blonde hair hesitantly asked if that was really the case, her voice barely hiding her unease. Someone at the table wondered aloud if Sir Iski would be competing in the upcoming gladiatorial tournament, since summer's end was near. Someone at the table mentioned the tournament would be held earlier this year, and said everyone expected Sir Iski to win if he participated. Another woman at the table said she was more interested in finding out who would be named this year's Flower of Glory. Still, a young woman with a tense gaze clenched her fists, thinking about the approaching gladiatorial tournament and the weight of her wedding ring. A young man with dark hair stood in shadow, dreading the day he would have to face Caesar again. A framed illustration of crossed swords hangs above an arena as the crowd erupts in cheers for a cloaked figure stepping forward. A noble knight raised his glowing sword defiantly, while the crowd remembered only nobles could enter the deadly tournament overseen by the clergy's committee. The frustrated girl in the blue dress yelled that visiting her was just an excuse and insisted that handling Iski alone was already too much. A mysterious figure made a cautious step forward, their foot barely making a sound on the floor. Feeling lightheaded, the blonde woman leaned against the wall and quietly wished she hadn't drunk liquor with so many people watching her. Still, the blonde woman in the blue dress stepped forward with purpose as the surprised blonde man froze in the ornate hallway. A sudden jolt ran through the blonde woman as she bumped into someone wearing a white sleeve, and she let out a startled gasp. The blonde woman muttered that she hoped people would stop bumping into her, rubbing her shoulder with a weary, half-forced smile. The blonde woman cautiously asked if the partially visible person was all right, and the person responded, then asked who she was. A blonde, elegant young man in ornate clothing introduced himself as Lorenzo Van Furiana and mentioned he believed she had spent much of the evening with his sister. The blonde man smiled warmly and offered to escort the blonde woman back to the banquet hall, while someone nearby recognized him as Freya's younger brother. The blonde woman politely declined the offer, saying she wanted some fresh air, and then asked if the other person was a paladin. The blonde young man smirked and told the girl with a lace-trimmed dress that he was only a squire, not worthy of suspicion. A white-haired man glared with such intense animosity. The narrator wondered how someone they'd never met could hate them more than Iski. The blonde man nervously scratched his head and asked if he was really that famous, sounding surprised to see the blonde woman standing before him. The confident young man with light hair claimed that everyone surely knew her name, since she was the Pope's daughter. The confident blonde woman smiled and told them she hadn't done much to become famous, unlike her brothers. Still, the blonde man and the blonde woman stood facing each other in silence. Someone revealed they had heard a popular song about her, adding that it was spreading quickly and everyone must know it by now. The polite man offered to sing the song, and the interested woman said he had piqued her curiosity and she wanted to hear it. The blonde young man adjusted his ornate bow tie clasp and explained that this was about how things usually went. A blonde woman with blue eyes looked determined as she considered what it might take to secure a mate she truly wanted. The pale young man with light hair smirked and said he thought her half-brothers would actually be the perfect match for her. A gloved hand reached up to touch the ear of a pale-haired young man. A blonde man seized the brown-haired man's face and shouted that he should think twice before speaking so recklessly. A blonde-haired young man yanked open the mouth of a white-haired young man and demanded an apology before threatening to rip it wider. A blonde woman with long hair laughed nervously and insisted to the unseen speaker that she would do exactly as she was told. The blonde man leaned in, intimidating the distressed white-haired man and demanding he apologize louder unless he wanted it forced out of him. The blonde woman nervously told them to let him go, adding she didn't care to hear an apology from him. A gloved hand finally let go of the blonde-haired person's neck, tension lingering in the air. Still, a blonde man dashed out of the room, leaving the blonde woman and another blonde man standing behind in surprise. The serious blonde man muttered with disdain that the childish bastard ran fast, while the smaller blonde observer called him a coward in disbelief. A nervous blonde man apologized for the awkward moment, and the smiling blonde woman reassured him that everything was fine. A calm voice urged the listener to forget everything about the disturbing song and ignore the man's strange words. An anxious and self-aware woman quietly told Sir Ivan there was no need to try so hard, since she already knew about the rumors. A blonde woman with blue eyes let tears fall as someone nearby stammered her name in shock. The flustered blonde man quickly reassured the teary blonde woman that her husband wouldn't care about the wild rumors people were spreading. A man with white hair and red eyes firmly grabbed the blonde woman as she nervously explained she hadn't meant to call herself a problem. The worried blonde woman quietly asked if Sir Iski hated her, and the supportive blonde man assured her that was impossible. The cheerful blonde knight raised his fist in encouragement as the chibi advisor explained he was just unsettled, while the chibi admirer wondered if she could like him. The blonde man shifted awkwardly and suggested to the blonde woman that they should return to the banquet hall. Two cloaked figures stood by the tall windows as one calmly said they needed fresh air and asked to be informed if their adversary returned. A blonde woman smiled warmly, quietly thanking Sir Ivan and thinking he seemed much more chivalrous and concerned than someone else she knew. The blonde woman in a fancy dress walked cheerfully down the hallway toward the cloaked figure. A serious young man with white hair and red eyes weighed Ivan's words, thinking that if Ivan was right about Iski, hope remained. The confident blonde woman clenched her fist and told herself she might actually succeed if things kept going this way.